Welcome to the Automotive Diagnostic Podcast. We're going to explore ways to sharpen our diagnostic skills, find learning resources, and hear from experts in the automotive field. This episode is brought to you by L1 Automotive Training and Keith Perkins. If you're looking for education on module programming, J2534, EEPROM work, key and immobilizer, electrical diagnostics, or drivability diagnostics, Keith has a website, l1training.com, that's got over 60 hours of training videos on all those subjects and more. When I first started out doing mobile, I utilized Keith's videos on module programming in J2534 in order to get my head wrapped around what I would need for the tooling, the computers, the software setups, what kind of obstacles I would be up against when I'm out there programming modules on cars. And it was a huge benefit to me. And I continue to use the training videos that he has on his website. So I strongly recommend checking out l1training.com. The link is in the show notes. Hey, what's going on, automotive world? Welcome to another episode of the Automotive Diagnostic Podcast. My name is Sean Tipping. I'll be your host once again for this week's episode. Thank you so much for joining me. On the show this week, I've got McDonald joining me. Andre is a former GM technician, and he's going to tell us about his path with GM through the dealerships and the various levels of what he did. But he's currently with Blue Origin, the rocket company. And again, he's going to share his path of going through the automotive space, being a technician, and how he got into the position that he is with Blue Origin. And it's a cool story. So he wanted to share it. I'm excited to share it on the show. Definitely an interesting path, and could be something that's inspirational for someone else. Maybe looking to make a career change or wondering, what other paths they could take using the tools and the knowledge that they have within the automotive world. So it's really cool getting to meet and talk with Andre. I think you'll enjoy this as well. With that out of the way, let's jump in. Easy enough to do. So, all right. Good evening, Andre. What's happening?
Thanks for having me on. Speaking.
Yeah. Kind of threw this together short notice. Tommy's out of town. He's been doing the interviews with me recently. He's down in Australia.
Oliva?
Yeah. So him and Steckler and Perkins went down there to do some classes for an event that I think is next weekend. But he's down on the upside down right now, hanging out. So
yeah, it's interesting. Well, that's cool. It's interesting just being like, these are the people I was listening to, and it's like just really cool to be here. But do you want me to introduce myself?
Yeah. Why don't we start there? You were a listener of the show, and you'd reached out. I was looking at our messages a couple years back. We've been chatting, but tell everybody who you are, where you're from, what you do, and we can take it from there.
Yeah, so I think what I'll do to start off, before I, give some weird long introduction where I lose everybody, just to give a general overview of who I am, what I have to do with automotive. So, the majority of my career, so from 2016 to really the end of last year, I was working in GM dealers. Our GM dealership service departments. So I guess if I'm going to start there, so in 2016, I got the idea that I want to be a General Motors technician. And so that was kind of spurred on by, my first car was a 73 Cutlass. I'm like, well, who made this? General Motors. Okay, I guess I'll work on this car a bit,
Sure.
And,
yep.
And it's funny, and I was thinking beforehand, like, yeah, I got to go there. Even before I got this car, I hated working on cars. Like, I wanted nothing to do with it. It was one of those things where your dad drags you out. you know, not to be stereotypical with the flashlight and everything,
Sure. You're not
let's go
holding it
change
right.
brakes. And it was just like, I want nothing to do with this. This is not fun. So, who maybe it was laid dormant and I just didn't have the right attitude at the time, but I wanted nothing to do with cars, believe it or not. I had no idea what I was going to do. But I got this car one way or another. And I got to give, my dad credit. I came home from school one day. He's like, I found this car on Craigslist. I shouldn't even show you. I'm like, well, you said it now, so you got to show me. So then, long story short, I come home with this car, and it's an old car. So I mean, I'm a young kid that's broke. I can't afford to bring it to a mechanic, and it's easy to work on. I mean, 1973, you could imagine a lot of the emission stuff was taken off. So I mean, but I mean, at the time, I had no idea what any of this was. I mean, I really had no business around on my car.
Like what
Uh,
year is this? I'm just thinking in reference for 73.
73, and I believe it had. It's funny. So when I bought it, they said it had a 350 Olds engine. So this, I believe, and someone could probably correct me on this, because I know in the 60s, like all of the General Motors divisions made their own engines. Like I know Pontiac had their own
Yeah.
engine, and I'm not sure if that was still the case in this time period with Olds, but it's. I bought it thinking it was an old 350, but the emissions sticker on the fan shroud said 305. So I don't
Oh,
know.
okay.
But it's 73, so you could imagine it had a quadrojet carburetor. Um,
But
uh,
what year did you get it?
okay. What year did I get it? All right, so I was still in high school, so it would have been around 2012, 2013.
Okay. So this
Yeah,
thing's seen some time.
yeah, and
Okay.
it was white with red racing stripes. So this is,
Oh, nice.
you think about a punk teenager kid that thinks he's somewhat cool and with a loud looking car, and it was, you can imagine, but
Sure.
so that's how it started. And so that was like it was like a switch flipped. Like I mean, before that, like I couldn't have cared less about cars. And then all of a sudden I'm like, research muscle cars and all this stuff. Like, everything I get into, it's just I take it way too far.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I was just like, oh, now I got to read all of GM's history on muscle cars, all the, and I went through that phase of muscle car, whatever. And so, I was still in high school, and realistically, I was actually somewhat thinking about my future, and I was like, what will I do? I kind of was thinking about my mom said you should do nursing. I was thinking maybe something with chemistry. I kind of liked chemistry, and but I really didn't know. I mean, I had a lot of different interests, like any kid, and but this car just kind of focused everything. Like everything else just kind of felt. I was like, I want to work on cars. It seems kind of cool because
Yep.
that's like there's a sense of pride in being able to fix something. And as a
Mm-hmm.
young kid that wants to have some sense of self-esteem and is trying to prove himself in the world, that's a skill that kind of makes you look cool. So that was kind of the motivating factor, and you know, so then as I'm throughout high school, I'm working on this car and I'm thinking about my future, and so I should mention I was living in Washington State at this time, the opposite corner of the country of where I'm at now in Florida, and so. Long story short, I was adopted here in Florida in the 90s at a period of time where there was some program for adopted children to have 4 years of college education provided by the state
Okay.
um, once they graduated high school, as sort of like just a program to help maybe children that were disadvantaged and to give them kind of a start in life. Um, so 4 years of it, and in hindsight, I only used half of it, but I getting ahead of myself. But that program was in the back of my mind. Living in Washington State, I knew I was adopted in Florida. If I wanted to do anything with that, I had to move back. Um, so long story short, I ended up moving back to Florida, and I had found that there was a community college that had a General Motors ASEP program. So
Okay.
that's you get to get a 2-year degree, Associate of Science in Automotive Technology, and so you get that, and then on top of it, you get GM credentials. So the goal is that at the end of the program, you've had classwork, you've also been spending some days at the dealership as an apprentice, working under someone that's hopefully teaching you and not using you to change oil. I know that's another conversation, But
Hmm.
so the goal is to kind of get you primed, and so that's what I ended up doing. So I moved back down here, and so went through that, and 2 years, and as soon as I graduated, I was like, I want to go flat rate. This is I want to prove myself. I'm ready. And my mentor said, I think you should just wait out. I'm not rushing you. You can just get some more experience under your belt, and
Hmm.
um, and work on me. And I was like, no, but it's gun ho. And then that started my career in dealership life. So I'm gonna stop, give a little break there,
Okay.
and
Yeah.
that kind of brought me to where I was at the beginning of my career 6 years ago, or 8 years ago.
Okay. Yeah, that first car, mine was carbureted too. It was an 86 Chrysler Fifth Avenue. And just because it was the cheapest car for sale in my little neighborhood when I was old enough and had money to buy my first car. But I was like you, I didn't know what I was going to do. Like most, or a lot of kids at that age, getting close to graduation, I had no clue what I was going to do for a career. And Automotive just sort of found me, and that's all I wanted to do. Once I got my car and I was like, oh, it's broken. Like I remember I bought it. It was the middle of February and it's like 40 below here and it didn't want to start. Of course, it's a carbureted vehicle. Of course, it's not going to start in that, but I'm
Yeah,
like, how do I fix this thing? How do I get it to start? And that's what set me off on like I want to be able to, repair, maybe modify the vehicles that I have, and took the auto classes in high school, which is, lucky to have that opportunity, and that set me off from there. But yeah, uh, the having your first vehicle, it's just like that freedom and identity, and I don't know so much anymore that that's common for kids, at least from what I hear, that lots of kids are waiting to get their license or they don't get their license, and it's not quite as big of an appeal as I feel like it was, at least when I was growing up. Like everybody was that parking lot at high school was such a fun place.
yeah,
Like everybody had their own identity. Oh, there's, Steve with the
yeah,
Fiero, or there's, Joe with the El Camino, and yeah, it was pretty cool.
yeah,
This show is brought to you by Automotive Seminars. If you're looking to stay up on the cutting edge diagnostic strategies and techniques, this is the place. You've got live 4-hour seminars that are put online that you can join in, ask questions, interact with the instructors with some of the best of the best. They've got Keith Perkins and John Thornton putting on classes like network diagnostics, mechanical engine testing, advanced electrical testing, and GDI diagnostics, and a ton more. And once you purchase one of these training seminars, you can access this at any time that you want through your account at automotiveseminars.com. You can rewatch the training a year, 2 years later, which makes this training even more valuable. So I highly recommend you check this out. The link is in the show
pretty
notes.
cool. Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, I have some family. I don't. I'm going to make sure that anything that could be that I try very hard not to be negative. Haven't always been the best, but I try really hard not to. So if I chance to say anything that might even be construed as negative, I'm going to speak in generalities.
Don't
So I
worry,
mean, I have a
Tommy's my co-host. You don't have to worry about
yeah.
it.
So and I have some good family members, nice family members, young and mid 20s and no license and never had a job, and I don't understand. I don't want to try and understand. I think I was a mechanic. I wasn't the person. I don't understand minds, but it's just
Sure.
interesting to me. I can't. I would think there's a certain sense of drive. There was a drive, I think, for me, and I think a lot of young ones. You just I want to get out and do stuff.
Yep.
So
Yeah,
I don't
get
know.
out of the house, get away from the parents, go do whatever I want, go drive where I want. I mean, we would just go drive around with no destination for hours at a time, which,
Yeah,
thinking back now, like I don't do that. If I drive somewhere, I have a place that I'm going. But we would
yeah,
just drive to drive, and we loved it. It was the best.
Yeah, well, I think like as kid, this sounds, it's funny. Like, so I'm turning 29 next month, and it's like I don't feel that old, but like it's weird that I'm only 29, and I can wistfully look back at childhood. Like I remember when it was
The young
really young, and I'm like,
whippersnappers.
I'm not even 30, but I think it's interesting how quickly we can forget like what
Yeah.
our mindsets were.
Oh
You
yeah.
get so busy with like the real world, like a rude awakening, and you kind of forget what childhood was like.
Yep. Well, and if you think about it that way, when you're a kid, it's so hard to understand the perspective of somebody 20, 30 years older than you, like your parents
Yeah,
or just somebody older, just like, I'll never be like that. I will never
yeah,
understand why you spend all this time doing blank or why you wouldn't want to do this. And now that I'm just about 40, I'm like, I get it.
yeah. And your perspective on like time, like when you were like when I was 15, I was like 18 years of old. 18 years of age is like 500 years away.
Yep. Yep.
And then I was 18, I was like being 21, it's never gonna come. And then
Mm-hmm.
you just start, and just to fast forward, I'm turning 29. I have a 3-year-old daughter, and you realize like what, where did it go? You know?
Yeah, and it only gets faster. I've been experiencing that too. Is like the older you get each year, it's just like a smaller blip of time. I'm like, ho, let's slow it down just a little bit. Um, but yeah.
Yeah.
Um, okay, so you're working with GM, and I think actually when we were first interacting on Facebook, you were mentioning like a potential field service engineer position with them, and maybe that's fast forwarding a bit, but where did you
Actually,
take it from there?
I think I'm gonna I kind of want to lead up to that because I feel like no, the lead up to that point in my career was really, I think, what's really important.
Okay.
Um, I think it's the build up and the struggle of getting even to that point. And I
All
think
right.
you'll probably agree. But so I left off with so got done with school. I'm going to go flat rate. Okay, and so I know I've heard it on the show. It's uh, I think for a lot of, especially the dealership level, I think, and maybe it's changed in the few months I've been out. I don't think it has, but uh, when I was getting into ASAP, and I was kind of naive. Well, I was naive about the industry. They sell you this. Techs are in demand. I mean, the whole spiel, and a dealership is a satisfying career, and the whole rundown. And I bought into that. And I'm not gonna, and that makes sound like I'm completely like dismissive of it. I don't think that it's a completely, all dealerships are bad. I think there's a lot of bad ones though. I mean, but that's how I got into that. I came in with that mindset with kind of a naive, this is going to be a satisfying career. I'm going to be valued. I'm going to be able to provide. And it's going to be up and as I get better and better and better, I'm going to make more and more and more, and I'm just going to do my work in cars and provide for my family. That's how you plan.
That's what was sold to
And
us too, as techs and tech school is like the dealer is where you want to be. That is the pinnacle, and that's what everybody here should be striving to do.
yeah, 100%. And I think a lot of the listeners will know what that's all about. And if they're not familiar with it, I think it's not one of those things that you have to. Like I said, I don't want to totally blow up the negatives, but it's just one of those things that you realize after a while it's not quite what they sold you.
Hmm.
So, to kind of just when I first went flat rate, I'm gonna start with my journey. It was rough. So just, and I think you've mentioned before, um, and I'll insert here too. So when I was in school, they paid for ASEs, and so when I graduated, I had all the 8 major categories. So I was, I'm a cocky young kid, and me and my friends, he was the top of the class, and I was second behind him. And I know we were probably a little cocky at times, and we got separated at one point. um, but I think and I've learned to be a little less arrogant because you realize it doesn't get you anywhere. But we graduated, and I think we were a little smug, and I think we knew we were capable. But then you know what's coming after that. You realize once you get out into the flat rate world of real world, it's not not always that
Yeah.
easy. But just so that's I go flat rate after school. I have my ASCs, and I'm like, I just want to jump into it. I just want to go for it. And and I think, just to put it simply, I don't think my experience was necessarily any more stressful than anybody else's, but it felt terrifying. You know, First job where I've been paid piecework, essentially, paid by what work I do. And for like a young kid, like the first time jumping into that, it's like, it's just nerve-wracking, you know.
Oh, for sure.
And and so and also I'm going to preface I'm not going to really mention the dealers by name, and the reason why is like I worked at about 4 dealers in total in 8 years. Okay. And the problem with, I think, describing dealerships as this dealership, it's too much of a blanket. I think every dealership I've worked at has had some really awesome people, and I think there have also been some bad experiences. But like, um, whether or not anybody I know will listen to this that works at those dealerships or not, it's just the experiences I had bad experiences with people, but I don't ever want to paint a dealership as bad.
Hmm.
But I'm just going to speak in generality. So, but my first dealership was a Buick GMC dealer, and it was where I co-opted, when I was an ASAP. And then, after I went flat rate for a while, and I was struggling, but you know, I, they knew I was going to be good, but they were still working me like every Saturday, so Monday through Saturday, even though I was flat rate and I wasn't getting a guarantee. And just to jump to the end of this chapter, it got to the point where I had a 9-hour week. You know what I mean? And like
That's rough.
like I just looked at my flag sheet. I'm like, I stood in this building for like 40 plus hours this week. I just got married. And I'm just like, I'm looking at this, and I'm like, I just at that moment, like I think it just clicked. I don't know. I don't remember what I was dealing with at the time elsewhere, but I was just like, I think I need to try a different dealer. You know. Um, but even before I left there, I was um, and if you want to interject at any time, please. I tend to
Yeah.
ramble.
No, no,
Um,
you're
I
good.
I will say there was one. As far as this is the diagnostic podcast, so I'm going to have to give. I got to throw in some case studies. Okay.
Sure.
So I guess my first real butt kicker at this first dealer before I left, and this is when I first really got my knee. Well, I got submerged in just a nasty diag that just like made me hate life for probably like 2 3 months. And so, but in hindsight, I guess looking at it, it was kind of the beginning of a measure of confidence. So I forget how it even started, but I think it was one of those it was an intermittent concern and had CAN bus codes. And if you could imagine a kid fresh out of ASAP scanning a 2017 Buick Enclave, and you got 50 U codes, and half of them are history, pass failed,
Yeah,
and you're just
yeah.
looking at that on GES2, and you're just like, you know,
Where do I
you know,
start? What do I do?
yeah. And like, for the longest time, I remember my mentor saying, "You see that code when it begins with a U? That's not a good day." you know, and he's like, "Those are data codes," and I was like, "Data? That sounds like something I know nothing about." you know,
Yep, yep.
yeah. And so, but anyways, this was like my first real experience of just like completely being like head against the wall. So it was some kind of intermittent concern, and it ended up getting traced down to uh, there was some connector in the D pillar of the car, and it was one of the big lever cam lock connectors, and it had a CAN line terminal was backing out. Okay, I mean, classic scenario. Like, I mean, in hindsight, like, I mean, if I was to go into it now with like a scope and something, I probably could have found it pretty quickly. But at the time, like, I didn't really know it. I didn't really know anything about scopes, and I was adept with a meter, but it was just I was like I felt so overwhelmed. I mean, it was completely overwhelming. And I
Yep.
mean, it took months to get to that point. I mean, it was, TAC cases were made, going back and forth with TAC, which is frustrating in of itself. Phone calls, the GM hold music with TAC is always good. And then, uh,
What
But
do they
and
have?
then
Is it like a smooth jazz or what?
it's the one that everyone knows. It's like the
The
one that's been the same.
elevator.
Yeah, it's been the same since the '80s, I think.
Okay.
But anyways, what's just it, but this is really critical because a field engineer ended up getting sent out. Uh, and his name was Skip. I'm not with GM anymore, so I'm just gonna say his name was Scott Lewiston.
Okay.
I'll say his name because I have nothing but good things to say about him. He was also called Skippy. That's how I knew him. That's Skippy. It's funny because he and another field engineer used to come in to the ASEP program from time to time and say hello. So I was familiar with who he was. And then all of a sudden now he's in my bay helping me fix a car, and I'm like, oh my god, this is serious. So, but long story short, we found the problem, and he didn't, it's typical. Field engineers don't fix the car for you. They come out, they guide you, and like, all right, you need to fix this wire. I mean, how it goes. And I felt so overwhelmed. But even when he was there, my boss said, why don't you guys go out to lunch? And he gave me some cash. And I got to go out to eat lunch with this field engineer, and it was just like just having lunch. Nothing, just talking. And he talked about how he got to where he was at. He was starting with the dealer, and I'm just looking at him like, man, how do you get to where you're at? And like I just from my perspective as a fresh out of ASAP kid, I was just like this. It was just really inspirational.
Mm-hmm.
It was a really really inspirational moment. And it was confidence building because he's like, you found the problem, which I don't think I found it. I think the foreman helped me find it, but he was encouraged. He's like, you found the problem. He's like, I think you can fix it. I think I ended up screwing up the repair so much that the foreman had to come fix it. But I was trying to bypass like a 64 pin connector or something, so you can imagine. I got some wires mixed up, and then it led to some other issues. But
Okay. Okay.
besides the point, that moment was like it was just like, wow, that is possible. Like that is something that is possible. Like he came from the dealer, he doesn't have a degree or anything. I mean, maybe he had a degree, I don't remember. But the point was like he got to where he was at a really, to me, is a prestigious role. And I don't desire certain jobs for the sake of prestige at all. I just thought it was cool. I mean, this guy gets to drive around and just die out of stuff, you know.
Yeah.
But like to me, my skills were so far away from that. I was like, I got a long ways to go. So, and I did. Um, so, anyways, that was a critical moment while I was at that dealer. But I moved on, and I think this was the real turning point in my career because you know, the dealership I left, this was the dealership where I was an apprentice. And it was kind of like that. Um, I still felt like that the kid
Mm-hmm.
in the loop. You know what I mean? Like I wasn't being taken seriously and whatnot. And I just felt like I needed to get a fresh start. And I was just, I've always told myself I'm either courageous or really stupid. So, but I just said, I'm just gonna go for it because after a 9 hour week, it's like, the thing is with flat rate, it's like almost like you have nothing to lose. Once, like you kind of smell a certain vibe of where you're at, and you're just like, it smells like time to leave. And so,
Yep.
this next move, I mean, I did think about it a bit more than that. I went to a couple different dealers in the area, and picked one that I thought was gonna work best. And but I knew like, okay, this is going to be a sink or swim moment. This is not the dealer that coddled me while I was an ASEP. This is just a dealer I'm being hired on as a tech. And so that was a real big moment for me. But it was and that's a good moment, a good stopping point, I think, to give you some time to speak as well, and I'll breathe. Um, is I guess that one of the first things I really wanted to emphasize, I think that what that was for me at that point in my career was, I'm not in any way encouraging people to do like impulsive things with their career, but to really think about, where you're going and what you want to do, and if even if you're afraid, because I knew like, wow, I'm just going to jump in and make it work, just that's the process of learning, and that calculated risks, everyone has to take into account their circumstances, but being okay with being uncomfortable, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. That's a really important thing for somebody young to understand. And like, I think about, yeah, if I could tell, 18-year-old Sean, one thing, It'd probably be something along the lines of like, you can do way more than you think you can do. And obviously that depends on the person. There's probably people where it's maybe the opposite. But for me, I definitely needed to hear that. Like, I needed to hear, like, you don't, yeah, you're going to suck at something, but you can figure it out and you can get there and like go, go check out this thing that's really scary because it's probably going to be the best thing for you. I remember so when I was a very young tech, this was probably circa 2008, I would say, and Identifix, at least in my opinion, that was kind of like their heyday. This was prior to the Solera buyout, and so things have kind of changed since then. And their actually headquarters are here, about 30 minutes from me, in Roseville, and the guy who owned the shop that I worked for came from a GM dealership, and he worked with one of the technician or the like service hotline specialists at Identifix
Yeah.
for GM. So we had like kind of an inside connection with this guy. And so we obviously we had the service, we used the website and stuff, but like we'd call this dude on GM stuff and he'd help us out with it. And that was really cool. And I actually got to go down there one time. Like we brought it's like an old Saturn L200 having some BCM issues or something, just
That's
goofy
before
door
me.
locks and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I got to go down there and see the shop set up and what they were doing and how they were diagnosing. And it was, just worlds, separated from what I was doing in my bay as a fresh tech out of tech school. And yeah, like you were saying, just like looking at like, wow, this is something I'll never, achieve or never get to this point, or it'll take me forever to do that, even if, I'm just gonna be hanging ball joints and stuff. But like there's no reason I couldn't have gotten to doing something like that a lot faster, if there wasn't the hesitation or the fear behind it. And I look at so we just went to the local tech college this spring, and I offered an intern position for somebody at the tech school, come work with us for the summer. And these kids are fresh, right? And we want to get somebody who's interested and did well in the program, but like they're fresh. They don't know a whole lot and there's a lot to learn. But at the same time, looking at it from my side, I'm like, it's not going to take them that long to figure this stuff out. We just got to throw this stuff at them, guide them,
Yeah.
help them, give them the
Yeah.
resources they need. But I'm like, give it a couple years and they'll figure this stuff out. They're young, they're smart. Whereas my perspective as me when I was that age is like, oh, it's going to be, you know,
Horrible.
30 years before I could even hope to, be doing this sort of work. So yeah, for anybody, young, just starting out, just, you can do way more than you think.
Yeah, and I think you know this is a really important topic because I think for anybody that really cares about what they do, you take your job seriously and you want to do a good job. And I think one thing I do want to mention that I want to definitely want to make clear throughout because like for instance, looking up at this field engineer, he was very humble. He wasn't arrogant or anything. And obviously, the people that the guy that mentored me was a humble man, and the shop foreman was a brilliant guy. He was humble. These were people that I admired because they were really smart and they never made you feel stupid. Um, because for one reason or another, growing up, I didn't feel very smart. And when you grow up with that kind of mindset, like it's very hard to shake that until you've done something to prove it to yourself.
Sure.
And and so the thing I want to say, when I was at that first dealer, I'm just gonna hop back for a moment. Once again, there were some wonderful people. My mentor was patient with me, my service director, because I my parts department, when I went flat rate, just to give you an idea, they put my bay was the one right in front of the parts window, and it was like wide window. So you could imagine dealership life being stared at by parts guys watching the new flat rate guy. And then so I broke a lot of stuff, and they just gave me the nickname Sir Breaks a Lot. You know, I would tear apart a door panel, go to the parts department. I need some dum dum. And he's like, "All right, go in the mirror, go look in the mirror." And then so but then but there were these moments at times too where like I'm in the middle of a big job and I'm like, almost, which is, I don't know if this ever happened. It probably did, but gotta flag this job to get, my paycheck, and then you break something, and like, it's one of those moments where it's the perfect storm, customers waiting, and it's just like the worst day ever. And like, I mean, my boss at one point said, I don't know when he said this, he didn't say it to me, but he was telling the loop tech, I wanted to fire that Andre kid a long time ago, but at least he works hard, but because I tried, and I'm like, looking back, I'm so thankful that I didn't get fired at different times. But I think it's important to realize like that, maybe for some people more than others, like you might feel like your whole world's caving in on you in those moments where you made a mistake or broke something or you misdiagnosed an expensive repair, whatever it is. Um, and I think and you've mentioned this before, and this is just a consistent part of life, know why you made the mistake, you know, think about it afterwards. And I
Yeah.
think, yes, it's okay to feel bad about what you did. Just learn from it, remember
Yep.
it.
Yep. That is valuable.
Um, so, but anyways, getting back to where I was with this new dealer. So this was like, all right, I got to prove myself. And I'm going to condense, I think, a bit, but during the interview, he asked, like, what can you do? I'm like, well, I've done timing chains on a 24-liter Ecotech. My first job was taking a head off of a 3.6 out of a cop car Impala. So that was my first job was doing that. But before I get distracted, I told my new manager, I was like, well, I've dropped 3.6 out of heads, 2.4 timing chains. I've done some common lift burrs. you know. Yeah. And so, he's like, all right, you're hired. So they roll my toolbox down. And I just kind of, it goes about how you'd expect. I kind of slowly start building my skills. And I was there about 2 years. And I think that was really where I just really developed. And to give you I'm going to point out just the ones that stand out in my mind. So, like, one of the real growing moments, I had I don't know what it was. I want to say it was like a Yukon, like a 17, or whatever the body style Yukon before it was like the T series, like the wide frame at the front and like the K. I guess you could say they were K bodies, but
Sure.
the 2017 era like Tahoe Yukon, that kind of thing. So it had some kind of noise, and looking back at it, I feel really stupid. Like it had a noise only in fifth gear. So what do I logically think might be the problem? The transfer case. Don't ask why. So I mean, okay, looking back at it now, I was just like, what? Like, and I think even some people said like, anyways, but um, so anyway, I put this transfer case in, a very expensive part, doesn't fix it. I look at my boss and he just smiles at me, says, all right, well, I guess you gotta fix it now.
Hmm.
And at that point, I knew it was in the transmission, and I had never torn open a transmission in my life. But and this was a real turning point too. Um, as a young kid, that I still try and prove myself. The Not really shop foreman, but the transmission guy there, and he was the only one willing to work on transmissions, so he had a complex. So, he was the one that maybe he was somewhat good at diag and he could do transmissions, but he was just one of those ones that was just way too arrogant about it. And it I'll elaborate on how this goes, but it he would kind of stab you in the back. So I went to him as like I was the young punk kid. I had teased him from time to time because I knew he was easy to jab at. Not proud of it, but I was always playing little pranks. I was that kid, you know. And but anyways, one day I had to kind of eat humble pie, and I was like, all right, you know, I got a transmission issue. I was just wondering if I could get your input. And yeah, and he was cordial. Seemed amicable, and I was like, okay, I guess we're mature. And he's like, all right, we'll just put it up on the lift, drop the pan, and then I'll come over and look at it. Okay. And so I forget what I did. I think I went up to the service drive and I told my boss, I'm like, all right, so and so, we're gonna go through it together, whatever. And so I go back and he's not there yet. And then, but the guy next to me, that I was friendly with, he says, when you walked away, um, you know, this guy, I'm not gonna mention his name, came over and said that, oh yeah, Andre broke this transmission, but you know what? I'm gonna go fix it for him. And I was just like, did he really say that? And so that at that point, I was like, all right, now I have motivation to have him not even help at all. Like I don't want to talk. I don't think I said a word to him afterwards. And so I had no idea what I was doing, but it was a six, I think it was a 680. Okay.
Sure.
And I I ripped that thing out, bettered it, I made sure, and I was right across from him at kind of an angle, and my bench, he could see it, and I made sure to very noticeably put my transmission parts down on my bench, you know, and just sprawl it all out and not ask him. And I took it apart and I found the problem. I said, hey, hey, is this the problem? And he's like, oh, yeah, I don't know what he said. And I said, okay. And I went ahead and fixed it. Well, I don't want to jump ahead, but, the problem itself wasn't what mattered with this as much. It ended up being like an output carrier, some planetary gear had chewed up or something.
Okay.
So, I mean, simple repair in hindsight, didn't get paid much for it. I think it was like 7 hours in total to rebuild this. Actually, I don't think I got paid for it at all because, anyways, that's another story. But it was this point of like I felt like I had something to prove, and I was really upset by how like he wanted to use my moment of failure to make himself feel better, and that was the real start of like I want to learn, I want to ask for help, but that's when I really started to realize that there are certain people in this industry that they just have an ego, and I don't need to delve into that, and it comes with a host of traits. But it was,
Sure.
but, I fixed the concern, and I got through it. When I first misdiagnosed it, I felt horrible and drove home that night. I have no idea how to rebuild a transmission. Blah, 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 what am I gonna do? But then I just have to tell myself, it's very unlikely this car will be in my bay 2 weeks from now, and that's what I would tell myself. I should probably be able to fix it in that time, and I
Mm-hmm.
did. And of course I get all done. I put it in reverse, and I'm like, yeah, and it moved, and, and but it was one of those moments where I was like, it was like a real confidence booster because I was the punk kid that broke something. Someone was going to kind of use it to make themselves look good, and I said no. And I was like, wait a minute, I just rebuilt the transmission. I can do, and so guess who starts getting transmission work now in front of the
Mm-hmm.
transmission guy? So guess I was doing a whole lot of 8-speed torque converter flushes, and as they change the fluid, who knows how every month. Oh, use the black label, and I use the blue label, mobile HP, and then now we're not doing converters. Now we're replacing them. Now we're not. Oh, well, now do the filter. As torque converter sugar with 8 speeds and 6 speeds is just. I mean, it's just what they do.
Part of life, yeah.
So I'm like, next thing you know, I'm regularly working on transmissions,
Okay.
and then it's like, okay, I've had some experience doing some electrical diag. I can rebuild transmissions. What else can I do? And so, and one day, my boss was coming through. He's like, "You want to work on diesel?" I'm like, "Sure," because my mentor at the first dealer was the diesel tech, and
Okay.
so I had gotten some experiences with LMLs, L5Ps. That was like my era, and so I did def pumps and def injectors, doing regen. So I got some really cool diesel experience just with my mentor. And so next thing you know, he starts throwing me some diesel work. So now and then I take stock after a certain point, and I'm like, I'm a young technician. I'm doing transmissions and diesels and no diet. What? I think I might be able to do this. So, and that's what I did. And it went well for a while. And then the this was first started. COVID happened. The chip shortage, and that happened to coincide the onset with there was a GM strike. There was a union strike.
Oh, sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And it happened to coincide with the time when I got a really difficult diag, and it was like a T1 style Sierra Denali. So that's the newer, not I mean obviously not the new body style, but that same general architecture as the
Uh-huh.
T1X or whatever it's called. Uh, and so long story short, it was a lightning strike. So you could imagine on Denali Sierra how many modules are
Oh,
on this
yeah.
thing.
Just
You know,
full of smoke.
you scan with GDS2 and all you see is just red crosses all the way down almost. You know, there might be like a green check mark here or there, and you're just like, all I see is red. What? You know, and then so long story short, I this was a dealership where I had two bays, but it was one flat and one lift. And this
Okay.
was on my lift because I had to access different modules up and down, but the thing didn't move. So this thing was a dead brick on my lift, and I don't know. I know for a while they were doing the guarantee with COVID, with the paychecks. But I think this was maybe after that a little bit because
Okay.
it was the point where like I have this lightning strike truck that I'm trying to actually diagnose. Insurance is getting involved. It's a big deal because it's this person's truck. I don't know how the person's in the hospital dying, and my
Oh.
wife doesn't know if she wants to keep the truck or get rid of it. And then we went back and forth with that. And then insurance went back and forth what they wanted to pay for an order. So like between deciding what we wanted to do, not being able to get modules because of the chip shortage and who knows what else, and because of COVID, because there were restrictions from China. So there were,
Sure.
it was just like I couldn't work on this car, and work wasn't, and it was just like it was getting to the point where it was like hours in the teens, and no one did, and no one did anything about it. Like, no, my boss was never like, "Hey, I appreciate you. I want to make sure you can stay here." And
Yeah.
it wasn't until I put my notice in. Have you flagged anything yet? And it's just like it's a little late for that, you know.
Right.
And and then this was where I kind of took an odd turn. I went to a Euro shop for 3 months,
Okay.
and I'm just gonna say it's such a blip in my history because the boss was horrible, and it was probably the lowest point in my career, and real stressful. But my coworkers were cool, but the boss was horrible. But I was only there for 3 months. But I was at a point where I was like, okay, I don't want to have anything to do with dealership life, and this guy sold me on something. And needless to say, the fact that it's not really worth mentioning, I won't go into too much detail. But I was there, and then I was like, this is horrible. And then my first dealership gave me a job. It's like, I'll offer you a job back. I want you here to do transmissions. And you're gonna hear this by the end of it, and you're thinking, Andre, what is wrong with you? You know. But I came back. I was only there 2 weeks, and like there was a new guy there that was working, and it was just like some weird gaslighty, snaky behavior, and just like weird, and just we did, and I think I said some things that I should not have said, and I mean, in fact, I know I said some things, and probably didn't help, and it was a kind of a stressful time. Don't want to make excuses, but just perfect storm where I probably wasn't acting the best. But I was only there 2 weeks before I had a kind of a tiff for this dude, and then I got my boss called me into his office, says, Andre, I gotta let you go. I
Mm.
actually know what it was. How could I forget? I wanted to trade in my wife's car for she had a Buick Encore, and we wanted to trade it in for like an Envision or something. And the owner's son of the dealer, he came to me and said, here's the trade-in offer I want to give you. And it was when used car values were high, and he really lowballed. And he gave me a piece of paper, and I just simply said, well, I was I think I was cordial, maybe not, I don't know. But he said, you know, this is what I can give you, and I said, I don't think it's gonna work. And so I walked back towards my toolbox, and I crumpled up the paper and threw it away. I didn't think anything of it. Well, I get called to my boss's office like 30 minutes later. Like, Andre, can you come to my office? I'm like, what could happen? Everyone was happy that I was back. My old coworkers, like, you've gained your skills, you're gonna come back, and it's at a good time for you to be here.
Hmm.
So I was like thinking everything's great. And I go up to my boss, and he's like, Andre, I don't know, I can't believe I'm telling you this, but I gotta let you go. And I'm just like, what? And he's like, Rod, apparently when you didn't want to take that trade-in offer from so and so's son, he thought that was the most disrespectful thing ever, and he wants me to let you go. And
Wow.
and like I said, have I done things to maybe be, a bit arrogant at times? And okay, I'm not going to say I was perfect, but nonetheless, I was like just kind of blown away. Like, really, that just felt like it's not seem like a commensurate reaction,
Yeah,
you
that's
know.
ridiculous.
And then I was like fired, and I'm just like, you know, I'm just like I just I was here for 2 weeks, you know. And so I went down the road to the next Chevrolet dealer and I got a job the same day. Um,
Okay.
and you know how that's kind of how it was, I think, and I think maybe still in GM dealership life, it's such a shortage. But I had a job almost the next day, pretty much. Um, and please tell me if you want to interject.
No,
Um,
no, you're good, man. You're good. I mean, that sucks. Yeah, the personalities. I mean, you're never going to get away from that. Any job you're at, you're going to probably have to deal with somebody like that. Hopefully, less so, depending on where you're at, or maybe you get into a place of management. Create something different through hiring and firing, so those people aren't in there. But when they're in charge or they're the boss's son, I guess there's not a whole lot you can do about it. I've worked with some
yeah,
characters over the year, which led to me being self-employed. To be totally honest, I worked at some really good places. The college was one where I couldn't have asked for better colleagues and coworkers. Just absolutely excellent. You get a little outside of our program into the administration, and things were different, but we didn't have to interact with those people very often. And not to say that that was all bad. They're just
politics.
within our unit, like our day to day. Oh my gosh, it was like nothing I had ever experienced before in the automotive world, wrenching. And I was like, wow, this is what it really could be like. Out in the workforce potentially too, and somewhat what I'm trying to create within our company. But it's definitely a lot harder than you might think. To when you get the dynamics of different personalities, and everybody's a little bit different, and like you say, there's egos, right? It's a male dominated industry, and there's
Yeah,
going to be egos involved. It's just That's just the way it's going to be. And sometimes having a little bit of an ego, yeah, maybe that's a good thing, to have the confidence to get the stuff done and be a top performer. But then you get two people like that or three people like that together, and
yeah.
yeah, we'll see how that goes. And I've been in those headbutting competitions with a dude at Firestone, man. Oh my gosh, that was the worst. Me and him, for whatever reason, we did not get along, and it got to the point of, like, yeah, shouting matches in the middle of the shop, which is not me. Like, I am not that guy. I get along with 99.9% of people just fine, or I separate myself from it.
Yeah.
If it's somebody, okay, I'll just ignore you. But this guy and me, we just did not work
Yeah.
together, and there was some transfers to different stores to get us to
Yeah.
not work together anymore, because it didn't work. So yeah, that's gonna happen, and it sucks for sure. But yeah,
How big's your company now? So I haven't listened in a couple of months, so
sure.
pardon me.
So we've got it's me, three employees, and then we have an intern for the summer right now. So we got, well, me and two other guys in vans, and then I have kind of like an administrator, dispatch person, and then our intern just kind of is riding along, helping out, learning as we go, and the opportunity is there. After the summer, we look at, okay, do you want to come on as an employee if he's performed up to our expectations, is actually interested in doing this as a position. So kind of see what happens there. But yeah, we're still small, which makes it a little bit easier to manage. But I couldn't imagine having 30 or 40 employees and trying to, there's going to be conflicts. There's going to be headbutts between people. Not everybody's going to be on the same page. It, and then you think, like, even bigger scale, like hundreds of employees, like
Yeah.
it's a pretty tall task to get everybody aligned and everybody to get along and something like that.
It's just terrifying because, and I don't know, I think some people are meant to run a business and some people are not. I
That's
think
true.
some people can successfully compartmentalize, but to that many variables that are uncontrollable, like I think that takes a special person to be able to be comfortable with that. When you have
Hmm.
multiple employees, to be able to think like these people, know enough to be dangerous is like the phrase I think. Uh, But yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, it's a wild ride, and I'm still at a very small scale, but it's like you were saying when you're young and you're just starting out and on flat rate, and you're just like, I feel very unsafe, and I don't feel confident about where my next paycheck, and am I gonna make enough to pay the bills, and
yeah,
that's kind of business ownership. I mean, they say people on flat rate are just really, independent contractors with W-2, and that's kind of the truth, right? If you're When I first started out doing mobile, I was on flat rate. It's like how many, you know, GM TCMs could I program in a day? Well, that's how much I got
yeah,
paid, right?
yeah,
And that's kind of the same. And until you do it, and then it's just a thing. Then you feel
yeah,
comfortable with it. But when you're just starting out, you're like, is this gonna work? I have no idea.
yeah. And that's one thing. I think one lesson I think I really don't think I would have learned, or at least not learned it, have learned as well if I had only ever worked hourly jobs.
Right.
You know, put pushing through those stressful weeks where you're just like completely like that. As there was an older tech that used to say to me, you have those weeks where it's like a dark cloud, you know. Uh, but sorry, go ahead.
I'm sure you know some people that have always been hourly their whole careers, and it is very different mindset. Like
Yeah,
if you're involved with their work at all, I'm just like,
yeah,
what are you doing?
move.
Why are you taking so long? What's like? Can we move on to the next thing?
Yeah, yeah. Well, and that's one thing. The struggles aside, the lessons learned. Despite everything, I think that's probably a mindset, like a working mindset that I will carry with me the rest of my life.
Oh, dude,
Um,
I'm flat rate for life, even if I'm not. Like the my day is intense, and working. I don't know that will ever change. I think in tenths of an hour. I'm scarred for
yeah,
life with that.
yep. I was just, it's funny. I was just thinking about that today, and we'll get to the whole, rocket ship stuff eventually. Um, but I was just thinking, like, yeah, I'm trying very carefully not to say anything, whatever. But
Do it.
let's just say, I was having that thought to myself today, like I cannot escape the tenths. They
Yeah,
haunt
yeah.
me.
Right, right.
um, but anyways, we'll get to that. Trust me, it's the buildup will be worth it. So, let me see. So, I walk down the road essentially, and I get another job at a Chevrolet dealer. And you know, this was really the last real slog I had at a dealer. And it wasn't the final dealer; it was the second to last. Yeah, and you're gonna laugh by the end of this. Trust me. But it was like this next dealer was like known as like one of the best, like the best in like the area, and I would argue that it probably is, like good reputation. So just to kind of give you an idea, I got hired on this dealership, and I'm just going to say this completely covered health insurance for individual employees. You know, as I almost every day I reflect upon my stay at this deal. I spent almost 3 years. And the owner spent $200,000 a year so that his employees could have that.
Wow.
And I was just like I'm not just comparing this to dealers I've worked at. Like I know that that is a gem. And so, really, best dealer I've ever worked at, 100%. And so I got started there, and I was like, wow, what a privilege to like work at this dealership. And it's the one I actually first wanted to get a job at when I was an ASAP, but it didn't work out. But it worked out at this time, and I was there for almost 3 years, and this is when I really hit, I think, the peak of my career. So I came on, I was like, I can do transmissions, I can do diag, and now some diesels, and eventually got to the point where I was the diesel guy. Our diesel guy just up and left one day, um, and I walked into work, uh, and my boss said, "I guess you're the diesel tech now." And I'm like, "Okay, that's cool." Um, it was nice though because I, because I was the only person willing to work on diesels. Like you're the only one that knows how to work on them, and you're the only one willing to work on them. And so I used that to my advantage,
Sure.
when it came to pay eventually. Um, and, and this was when I felt like I was really hitting the peak of my career, and, and I'm only going to say what I'm about to say because you'll understand it's not a brag as soon as I finish it. I was getting those weeks where I was like, yeah, I just $2,700 this week. But then there were still those weeks where it was like, I just had an $800 week. And that could have been the week right after, But, it was the point at which I was like, okay, I am the diesel guy. I can do some transmissions here and there. I got certified in hybrids and EVs mainly because they needed two people that were certified. I never really had to work on them. But, I was sent off to the trainings and to do that. And at this point, I was like, I've come pretty far. I'm certified in EVs, I'm doing diesels. I have my diesel ASE. Um, and I was going to my GM assessments where I could actually go to the world class. And I think
Okay.
I think you're familiar with world class status,
Yeah,
right?
I've talked to a few people who have gotten that certification.
Mm-hmm. So I was thinking I'm going to be a dealership tech. And this is the dealership I want to retire at. They had good retirement benefits and good insurance. And I was like, this is where I want to retire. And so I was just like, okay, I want to just, you know, cement in, get my world class status, and I really want to just, maybe be a shop foreman or something, but just, just settle in and just really do a good job. And so I set that as my goal. And, I don't know when it really started, but I think it was little things, bad management, not bad ownership. Um, and I think the problem started mainly because I think a lot of things were kept under the rug. And I don't think the owner really knew about it. Maybe he did. Maybe I was just naive. But like it was one of those things where it's like something's not matching up here. Like the way I know the owner of this dealership to be, very, very upstanding, kind man, and then the way I'm being treated by management, it was like something's not right. And I don't know why things ended up the way they were, but it was to the point where like they hired on a second diesel tech and my hours fell in half. They didn't want to do any. They were still feeding, the uncertified lube tech essentially cam and lifter jobs. He's making 70 hours a week, and I'm having, like a string of weeks where I make 25. You know, broken 10,000 pound lift that I use for all the diesels that's got a leaking hydraulic line that they refuse to fix.
Hmm.
And I'm just like, at this point, do you want to just like spit in my face? I mean,
Right.
and I was just like, but and like I said, I'm not gonna ever claim to be perfect or holier than thou, but like I always tried to be like honest and like do a good work, do a good diag, and I just felt like it was just to put it simply, the pressure was to go along to get along. You know what I'm saying? This is the way we've been doing it. Just get things going. One of the things my boss told me at one point in time was it's all, you don't need to diagnose every car. You can just, if you get 8 out of 10 right, that's fine. And this is where I was like, I've been in this several years. I've run into this over and over again. And now I'm starting to get wiser. I'm like, it's the same problem every dealer I've been at.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm like, okay, there's a pattern here. I've essentially worked at every dealer in the reasonable local area of driving distance. And in one way or another, I've run into the same thing. I put my all into it to do all these different things, diag, transmission, diesels, certifications, what have you, helping other people with diag, you know, and just to feel like, what do I have to show for it? What do I have to show for it? And I'm like, what am I doing wrong? Like, am I just that bad of a guy that like, and I guess that's just, and I'm going to take a break here. And I think it was just, I realize it's just the moral issue. It's just like, if you want to be a person that wants to honestly diag a car, fix a car, not rip off a customer and not lie to them about why something didn't fix it, you're just constantly swimming upstream.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, it's been talked about plenty of times, but the system's not set up for people to do diagnostics. And I mean, quite honestly, even doing it on the mobile side, it ends up being the toughest thing, that we do, or the services that we offer, to like make it profitable and to make it work because we're playing with the same system, right? We've created a third party, but we're still going into the same shops that are, have their systems set up the same way, that are selling it to their customers the same way, that believe the same thing about their cars as the things that you're talking about, right? And so it's still tough to say, yeah, it's going to be $400 to diagnose this problem. And we're like, what? How could
Yeah.
that be? Well, yeah, do you understand the tooling and the experience and the time and the resources that it's going to take to get to this problem, to, figure out this CAN network problem, that no one's ever seen before because it's a mouse to true to wire that, it's, it's not a Identifix problem or a TSB. It's a mouse that got hungry, and that exact one's never going to happen again. And so like we've got to spend some time, and we've got to have knowledge about the system, and we have expensive tooling, and it costs a lot of money to train people to know how to do this stuff. And it's tough, man. Again, even with us, we've had many talks about this recently of like, it is so much easier. It is so much easier to make money with programming keys
Yeah.
and ADAS than it is with diagnostics. Not that we can't make money with diag, and we do, and it's our number two. It's 40% of what we do, but it is like the resistance comparison between the four things that we offer. That's the toughest one by far.
Yeah.
By far. And I think that just mirrors what you're saying, in a dealership, is the system's not set up for it. Fonzo talked about like, how cars are like commoditized to
Yeah.
the public and the people that own them. And Tommy's talked about how like you're buying a brand new Tahoe that's $100,000 on credit, and the end user doesn't consider that that vehicle is like it's $100,000 thing that you got to fix pretty soon, and it's got $100,000 worth of
Yeah.
components on it.
It's disturbing to
And
think about.
yeah, and or you still want your $100 is a lot to diagnose the problem on this one, really. Like that's where like there's some unevenness there. And I mean,
Yeah.
I, I don't know. It's one of those things where I think the demand hopefully will just continue to drive up the price, but it is again the biggest area of resistance. So
Yeah, and I don't want to focus too much on like how broken it is, but it's definitely something I think to put a cap on that whole thing is that I think, and this is my opinion, it's not prophecy of anything, but it's just I feel like it's just gonna have to completely rot out. I don't know. I feel like it's just gonna get that bad to where the things are so complex that it's just gonna hit a wall until until people have to do something. But we'll see. Um, but to be more positive, so this is once again the diagnostic podcast. So this is where things I think really kind of come full circle. The field engineering thing comes in, and everything kind of was pretty heavy acceleration after this point. Though at the time it didn't feel like it. Um, so I forget what it was. At one point at this dealer, this last real stay at a dealer. Um, I had never used the picoscope. Usually the picoscope gets involved. Um,
sure,
uh, Turned into an obsession, but my golly, but it was a. Uh, I forget what was the first issue. I think it was a Malibu. Okay, so I think it was 2021 or 22 Malibu, 1.5 liter CVT. I'm sure you can picture this. And the way this car came into my life was one of the kind of techs in training moving up. He was promoted from Lubrac. He was following a bulletin, and it had, I think it was DTC's, I'm probably remembering incorrectly, but I think it was like P3055 and 3056 for the DC-DC power module. For the provides like a boost of current when the starter
sure,
kicks on to
yeah, yeah,
keep the radio and the IP on, so your radio doesn't die every time your auto start kicks on. And so it had these codes, and if you typed in these codes, and there was a bulletin that came up with it, and it fit the bulletin perfectly. I mean, you followed through it, test this, test this, test this, replace the DC power module. So
Mm-hmm.
the tech did that, and it didn't fix it. And he did everything he was supposed to do, and so they're like, Andre, you want to look at it? I'm like, okay. So I kind of went through it, and before I went, and I'm not one for flowcharts either, but if there's a bulletin on something, I'm like, well, okay, there's probably a problem with it. Let me just
Sure.
follow it through. And so I followed it through just like he did, and I'm like, and we, as you know, known is it a known good part? DC
Right.
power modules, I think, were known to not necessarily. I mean, the fact there's a bulletin on them tells you. So I was like, well, I mean, I went through it again myself, and I did it by the book, and I says it's suggesting to replace it. I was like, let's just try one more before we start really getting nitty gritty with this. Did fix it, okay. So that's when I'm like, all right, I have now inherited it, and and this is where I think you and I will probably start to really identify is like by this point I had the confidence to know I could probably fix it. And it was just that like you knew it was going to be one of those problems that you could sink your teeth into and just kind
Mm-hmm.
of get lost in it. You know what I mean? Your Zen mode, whatever you want to call it, your flow state. And that feeling. I think you've mentioned it. What is it? You've said chasing the dragon. I think before. You know.
Yeah, right, right. It is. It gets you excited. Like, okay, this is an interesting one.
Well, and here's the thing. This is something I wanted to mention. Brandon Steckler. Never met him, but he seems kind of cool. So, and he's one of those ones that you can tell like likes physics. Okay. And I
Mm-hmm.
remember I didn't watch the episode, but I remember, there was some opening in one of his recent like I forget what his show was called, but it was like, when we're uh diagnosing a car, we're essentially doing physics. And and I think and before I go down that rabbit hole, just touching on like that feeling, like when you really start getting to that level of diag to where there isn't published diag and you're
Yep.
just truly having to go off of what you know, what your senses are, it's a really cool feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Um, to get into that. So that's when I was like I've always like jumped on these things because it's like I can probably figure it out, but um it was one of those situations where I'm like this P3055, 3056 for like DC B plus circuit, like high resistance or something, and it was history every time I scanned it, and it would set a check engine light, and I would clear it. You know, if it didn't go into an auto stop event, it wouldn't set,
Okay.
and then well, actually no, what it was like, you would clear it, um, it would disable auto stop was disabled because the code was setting even in history.
Okay.
So I would drive. I had a little test drive loop, and I was just trying to like get a good baseline. What's happening here? Well, clear the codes out, drive it, get a fresh start. I want to see it resets. So no check engine light came on. I come back, but I've got these codes in history, and I'm just like, what in the world? And so then this is once again, I had not grabbed the picoscope yet. No, I was still using my Fluke 87, and it was one of those typical. I'm like, I go to the flow chart because I'm like, looking at this thing, and it's like I'm just kind of comparing the flow chart a little bit with the diagram, and just kind of mixing the two in my own little kind of way. And so like, just to kind of give you an idea, like one thing that I kind of learned from a tech was I go to the flow chart for the DTC. I just want to know like, okay, am I supposed to have voltage on this pin, or what voltage am I supposed to have here? So knowing what I'm supposed to have, and then just go to the diagram from there. But I verify my voltages and everything checks out fine. And I'm like, this is just weird, you know. And like I had no idea where to go with it. There was nothing wrong every time I tested it. Everything tested fine, but I could
Mm-hmm.
not get it to stop settings history. And
Okay.
I'm just like, what in the world? And I'm just like, for whatever odd reason, um, I don't know what caused me to do it. It doesn't matter. But I went to go grab the picoscope out of the tool room. And just to kind of, you might chuckle at this. So it had been used for MVH before, obviously, because we had to use them for the torque converter shutters for a while to get a
Okay.
printout. So like there was a period of time where we had to get a pico reading to send in to GM with every warranty claim.
Okay.
So it had been used for MVH, but if you were to look at like the test leads, like for just electrical, still in the bags.
Sure.
Okay,
Okay.
so I'm like, interesting. And so I can tell nobody uses this. So I'm just gonna grab this, keep it in my base. Oh, I don't know if I was keeping it in my bay yet, but like nobody uses this. I'm gonna use this thing. I'm gonna take these
Yeah.
things out of the bag, and I want to just, this car is obviously broken. I think it was a used car, and I was like, okay, obviously I'm not really making progress with this thing, so I don't really know how to use a scope. But what's it gonna hurt? Let me just
Hmm.
start poking around and see what pops up on this screen. And so as you know, like the first time you use a picoscope, you're like, what are all these buttons?
Yeah, right, right. I have no idea how to navigate it.
Yeah, and I'm just like, what's that time base? Stuff like that.
Yeah,
But
sampling? What?
yeah, and you're just like sample rate, and I'm like, how? What do these numbers mean? And all of
Uh-huh.
a sudden, and you're just like, I have no idea what any of this is. And so I think that night it was just I was like, I'm bored, and so I just started like poking around, like I want to just poke this the scope. What pops up? Oh, cool, that looks like this. I scoped the ground on this DC module, and I don't know if I had done a voltage drop test or not. Maybe I did an ohm check. I don't remember. But when I scoped that ground, so you could imagine I back probed the ground connection at the module, so I'm seeing the voltage drop all the way to the wherever it bolts to the body, wherever. And I
Hmm.
saw this kind of, and it's if you've seen it, it's almost the same pattern every time. When you get a high resistance on a module ground, it's a peculiar waveform. It's not like
Okay.
just a sine wave, but and I think it's on my Picoscope Facebook group somewhere, pictures of it. Um, but I saw this like 1.5 volt wave of voltage drop going up and down on a mod. I'm like, I've never seen a. I mean, I've always used a fluke meter, which averages. So when I see that, I'm like, I don't think grounds are supposed to do that, you
Right.
know. And so I'm like, well, that ground must be bad. So it was easy enough because like where this was, it was kind of like right below the shifter, bolted to the middle of the body, and it was like a ground that was just kind of like I don't know, maybe like a foot away. And so I just kind
Okay.
of pulled up the carpet, ran new ground. I was like, that'll take what, like 5 minutes, just snip some wire. It's a real quick check I can do. Let me run a new ground, see what happens. And I still got this wave. So I just want to mind you, like I have no other codes in the car. I am only setting these two P 3055, 3056.
Okay.
So I'm not suspecting an issue somewhere that would theoretically impact everything. And so, long story short, what I ended up doing, I ended up having an open attack case. I had to swallow my pride. Felt really dumb, but it is what it is. And the TAC engineer or TAC representative said, "Have you voltage dropped the battery cable?" I'm like, "No." He's like, "Voltage dropped the battery cable, the negative battery cable." And this was a turning point for me. Um, I'm like, okay, and so I'm used to like when I do my voltage drop test, and well, after the fact, I started actually doing a lot of negative cables. We actually had a bad batch, I think, at GM for a while, but
Oh, yeah, I've done a few of them, and I don't even work at a
yeah,
GM dealer.
there's bulletins on it, but this was just one of those moments that really cemented it. Um, but the reason I wasn't thinking when he told me check the battery cable, I'm like, if I had a battery cable issue, wouldn't I have like codes with like everything? You
Yeah.
know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so like I was not thinking like of like a primary ground because like that I would think I would have like a bunch of different codes. And usually they do when you have a battery cable issue, it sets like
Yeah, a ton of
weird
com
stuff.
codes and stuff. Yep.
Yeah, weird stuff. So he tells me to do it. I'm like, okay. And so normally, you do your cranking voltage drop test. So like, just say hold the pedal to the floor and then, get that rule load on the starter, load up that cable and see what voltage drop you get. And
Yeah.
typically, I think GM gave a different spec for like what different lengths of cable should have been. So like the little jumpers, the positive jumpers on the fuse block would be like 100 millivolts. Some negative cables would be 200 or whatever. And normally if you had a bad cable and you did that crank voltage drop test, you would see that drop if there was one there.
Yep.
So here's what blew my mind on this Malibu, and it still blows my mind to this day. I think I was letting the car run, or no, I think I set up my fluke. I went to the negative cable and I went to like the shock tower, where it was bolted to, and I cranked it, and I think I had it in min max mode, and I checked my voltage, and then I took it out of min max mode and just idling the vehicle. there was a 700 millivolt drop on the negative cable.
Oh,
And I'm
wow.
like, what in the world? Like, how does this thing not have like
Yeah.
a host of other issues? And so I chased that ground to like where it was bolted somewhere underneath the battery tray. And lo and behold, like I went to go look at the nut and like I touched it with my finger and thumb and it was loose.
Oh, damn.
And so, and that was one of those ones like I've probably put like 10 hours into this car at this point. I mean, I've cut out so much of this. This was really like a real clincher, and I had messed around with the scope a lot, but it was one of those things where like I got through with it, I learned something, but I was like, I saw something with a scope that I could not see with anything else.
Yeah.
And that was just like the real eye opener for me. I was like it was almost like I hate to make it sound like some like revelation, but I was just like, how have I not used a scope before this?
Yep.
You
Yep.
know?
No, it's the same way with Pico, man. When I first got I was pretty late to the game too, and I do a lot of catch up with it and looking at secondary ignition but once I started using it, I'm like, I have been fixing cars in spite of myself for so long, not looking at this stuff. Like, yeah, okay. You have that initial period at first where you want to scope everything, and then you realize, like, okay, I don't have to scope everything, but when I'm to that point, this is the tool, and I gotta have
Yeah.
it, and I can see so much more or get to the thing quicker than I ever would be any other way. So, yeah.
Yeah. And so, I mean, and I'm just that was a representative study because it got me into the scope. And so then I was like, okay. And this is actually where you come into the story. Okay. Um, so I don't know the order of things, and so they might get jumbled, and that's okay. But I went. I don't know if it was that night or around that time, but I remember going to bed around that time one night, and you're gonna laugh at this. You're gonna laugh. I had never heard of you or the show or whatever, and I was just thinking, I was really starting to like push my diag game, like going beyond, like, cause I was like, this is stuff service information doesn't help me with, so I was like starting to like look at the Pico YouTube channel, and then I was like, I wonder if there's an automotive diagnostic podcast. I kid you not. I kid you not. So I'm in my bed and I'm like, let me just go on to Spotify and I'm gonna type in automotive podcast I kid you not, I'm gonna see what comes up. I'm like, what diagnostic podcasts? And then I play it and I hear that rockin' music, and welcome to the automotive. And I was like, what is this? And I'm like, what's a U scope? And I'm like, ignorant me, I'm on Amazon looking for a U scope, and I'm like, wait a minute, what's this AES wave? So then I'm like, I'm obsessive, and then so I'm like, Android Auto, I'm plugging in my phone, I'm listening to automotive podcasts on my way to work, on my way home, and I'm just like soaking it up, like, oh, all this knowledge, you know. And it was just like an obsession. And I'll be very honest with you. I'm not trying to blow your head up. I mean, it was just like, I started at the beginning. I never caught up. And I was just like, well, I've got so much listening material. I can just listen nonstop. And I just don't think I don't know.
Just me yammering on
Yeah.
endlessly. So
Yeah. And then, but it was just like, it's like, I mean, I might not hear every aspect of it, every little tidbit, but like, I just always told myself, and this was that anything I've learned in life, I was just like, you don't know when you'll use a seemingly random piece of information.
sure, yeah,
I'm not, obviously, it's, as you know, it can be easy to go off on like these like wormholes. Like Matt Ponzo said one time, magnetism, quanta, all that, you can really go down
yeah,
a rabbit
yeah,
hole there. But, realistically, I mean, I think we should kind of push the boundary of like well, I want to learn this thing. I don't. It seems like I can maybe use this. I don't know, but like if you do that over and over and over and over and over, eventually you have a bunch of little snippets of information that you can piece together to create this, an understanding. And that's the whole key point. Between knowing and understanding. Yeah.
Even if it's just an introduction, introduce you to a concept or a thing or a tool or a place or a person or a training class. Like my instructor in the second year of tech school told us about EPROMs.
Mm-hmm.
And That was a long time before I really needed to know what an EEPROM is. Now I do it every single day. I deal with I touch them and change them and read them every single day. And this guy was telling me back in 2006 about them.
Yeah.
And like it is pretty crazy how some of that stuff comes full circle and you don't know when it will be.
Yeah, and it's a really funny feeling. It's one of those feelings that I don't know, I think a lot of I think oh my God, what am I trying to say here? Just that feeling, sometimes you look back at your life and you realize if I had not done this or this,
Sure.
seemingly small thing, however long ago, like it would have completely changed something else.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like I think like you just never know. And I think that's another key point. Like, finding this podcast, and maybe it seemed like just a small thing, but you realize that you're investing in yourself. You know, Uh, and that's like I think one of the best things you can do. Um,
Yeah,
with
for sure.
so let me see here. So I want to kind of once again bring it back. So here's where I'm at. So summarize where we're at. I'm at this dealer. I've kind of come along in my career. I'm doing diag. Now I'm using the scope, and now I'm just kind of like listening to this podcast, and I'm like learning about all these people, and I'm hearing about, here's a resource where I can learn over here, and then all of a sudden, I'm like, who's Paul Danner? You know, and then I subscribed to Scanner Danner, and then I was like, every lunch break, I was like watching a Scanner Danner episode or something. So it was just like anything I was doing, and that's how I've always been, for better or for worse, so just everything I want to understand. It's just like I feel like we should try to understand. And that's what's hard to grasp is like you work with people that just don't want to take the effort to understand
Mm-hmm.
what they're working on. Even you mentioned earlier people don't have this drive, and I remember fellow technicians coming to me, hey, do you want to do this job? I don't know how to do it, and it was like a steering angle sensor or something. I mean, I don't. I was like, okay, but I was just thinking to myself, like, I really feel bad for you because like you're not going to get anywhere with that attitude,
Right.
you know, and it's sad, and it's like I think it's because people are just afraid to just get out of their comfort zone. But it's like, but when he said, that mindset of like I don't know how to do this, you can do it. So that's where I'm at in my career. I felt like I'm like, wow, okay, so I've been in this a few years, a few different dealers. I've built my skills. I can diag, but then things start going bad, and I'm like, okay, I've got some decent skills. I wonder if I can be a field engineer. I was like, well, I thought of Skippy and Scott, and I was like, let me just try this. So I go on the GM website, GM Careers, and I apply for I think a couple of them, and I get an email. A few days later, a week or so later, we'd like to do a phone screen. That was pretty cool because like you either get like you can look at the status of your application, and it might not even make it to a screen, but it made it to a screen. And then I talked on the phone with this woman from GM for about an hour, and she like made it sound like we looked at your resume. We could really hire you like yesterday, and like I mean they really just like built it all up. And I don't know what happened. I mean they sent it. I'm gonna send you an email with like send you some questions, do some like this, record these your recorded answer to these questions. It's kind of like a virtual interview thing. It was like multiple
Okay.
stages, and then so I did that, and I'm like, oh my goodness, this is happening. I screened. I'm sending in this, and they said we're gonna talk about it. You should hear about the final part of your interview like next week. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. I contacted my contact, the recruiter, wouldn't respond until I was rather firm. I said, "Can you just be straight with me? Like, do you want to have this? Are we going to go forward with this or not?" And like, oh, we're gonna. I think I don't know if I heard it from her or someone else. Like, oh, we found a fill for the position.
Mm.
And I was like, could you just like just told me like don't
Yeah.
waste my time. But nonetheless, I applied for every field engineer job after that, and then maybe out of desperation, I mean, I was just applying for all these jobs on the GM website. Test technicians at Detroit, whatever. I want them to know who I am. Maybe that was a good or a bad thing. I don't know. Um, then I'm going to kind of condense some things. I went back to my home dealer for the third time now. Now, granted, by this time it had been bought out. The previous owners, GM kicked them out. Let's just put it that way. Uh,
Okay.
So I went back to my home dealer, but under different ownership. Okay, so same dealer, different dealer, kind of, but um, and it was kind of I told them like, look, I can do oscilloscope diagnostics. I would like to say I'm bordering field engineer level. If you're gonna pull me over here, just be straight with me. I need to make a living. And they were like, all right, we want to kind of help you take over the shop foreman's role when he retires because he's going to be retiring any day now. And I'm like, okay, so like I'm going to get hired on, and then I'm just going to cut out so much of this because it's just a lot of it's a repeat. I had a really gnarly difficult canvas diag on my 22 Yukon. Once again, one of those ones I spent like 12 hours into some random ground splice in a harness somewhere that was the issue, and spent like 10 hours in it. And it was like one of those ones, intermittent issue every 60 miles. And, my paycheck after that diag was a 20-hour week.
Mm.
And I just, something like kind of snapped in my head. And I was just like, I'm about to lose it.
Yeah.
And, I was like, I'm going to apply for different jobs. And, I applied for a role. It was actually electrical diagnostician at Factory Zero. And I think this is where I kind of messaged you a little bit. I actually got to the point of the phone screen and interviewing with two electrical engineers from Detroit. And
Okay.
it was basically, you're going to come up to Factory Zero where we're making the Hummer and all the Ultium full-size trucks. So like Hummer, the Escalade IQ, and basically you're going to diagnose problems on the line and then relay them back to engineering, essentially, is what it was going to be. And so, I mean, I made it to the point where I was third final part of this interview. I mean, I somehow made it through an interview with two electrical engineers, and I just have an associate's degree in automotive. And and they ended it like, we like your personality. I'm like, oh, I've got this one in the bag. Didn't get it. So I'm like, okay, but that was a confidence booster. I applied for Rivian. Okay, I finally just had enough of GM. I think I had like over 100 applications for GM by the time I got done. I was like, this is not going anywhere. Applied with Rivian, uh, and hired on as a field service technician in Tampa. And coincidentally, like their field engineers were based in that area, and I kind of befriended one there. And I was trying to hope to do the same thing with Rivian that I was trying to do with GM. Be a field engineer, because someone had told me that if you're a dealership technician, there's a clause where in a franchise agreement where the GM corporate is not going to try and steal techs from your service department to be field
Okay.
engineers, because
Okay.
there was I guess a period of time where, as you could imagine, who's going to
Sure.
make the best GM field engineer? Well, the techs and the dealers. So I guess there
Yep.
was a time
Yep.
where it was a real problem that GM was scalping all the dealership's best technicians to be field engineers. So it's like a catch-22 where like you could be the most highly qualified dealership technician to be a field engineer, and they're not going to hire you because you're a dealership technician. So
Okay. Okay.
it's like and so someone recommended, well, why don't you go work for a different manufacturer, so that way that isn't holding you back. Just
Yeah.
start fresh with a different manufacturer and see where it leads you. Maybe you'll go back to GM. Maybe you'll stick with and I was like, and I was kind of just realized I think I just need to read the writing on the wall. And so I went to go work for Rivian as uh see, my battery's low in my headset. I think it'll last for a bit though.
Okay.
If it doesn't, I might just have to go to the laptop. But
That's fine.
so I got hired on Rivian. I'm kind of getting buddy with a field engineer and some people of that sort, and even doing some like really gnarly diags right off the bat at Rivian. Like just to give you an idea, and this was also kind of weird. So I applied for a role for Rivian in New York. It was like senior diagnostic specialist or something, and I was actually um, not selected for it, but I had applied for a couple of copies of that position in different locations, as well as a field service tech, which wasn't going to pay as well, but I ended up getting the role as a field service tech at their service center in Tampa, which is just basically their name for a technician. Um, and so, but like right after I started, I guess one of my old interviews or one of my old applications was selected. They wanted to interview me for a diagnostic specialist role within Rivian for a position in New York, but they had an internal policy where you couldn't be promoted. They had some odd internal mobility guidelines
Huh.
where you had to wait a really long time, and that's one of the reasons I ended up leaving, because it was just like, this is not working. But it was like, I told my manager about it, and I was like, I'm being interviewed for this role for Rivian for diagnostic specialist, like a senior diagnostic specialist, which is like a prestigious role in New York. And he's like, oh, let me talk, like that's against policy, and they canned it. I'm like, oh,
Huh.
okay. I was like, whatever. I'm like, well, maybe I'll be able to prove my worth here at the service, and I'll be able to make it up. And then I mean, I befriended the field engineer there, and he ended up being really nice, and he actually like showed me how to get a license for Canalizer. So like now I'm like playing with data loggers,
Okay.
and and at Rivian I got to do some really cool stuff because they had, it was just a completely different way of doing things. And the way like scan tool service information was integrated into a browser, and and AI, it was just really different. And
Okay.
I think once it gets fleshed out, I think it'll work well for entry level techs, and I think it's very structured. And I will say that I think it was very structured, but it was totally different. But like I kind of came in as like, this is a corporate job, hourly, a little bit slower, and I come in like the guns ablazing dealership tech. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And they had a Pico there, and I was like whipping that thing out, using it all the time, and to the point where I was like diagnosing issues that the diagnostic specialist there had not yet been able to fix. And me and another tech that was really bright, you know, we whipped out the Pico. We were doing some gnarly diag, and I don't know if we ever ended up finding the issue, because I left when I told them what I think it is, what I thought it was, and but it was just, they had some weird issues about not moving me up, even though I seemed qualified, and then I felt like there were some perceived issues with some harassment with people that were just making my life miserable there, and I was just like, I don't feel comfortable coming back to work. But what's interesting, and this is where things really start to get up to where we are now, because this was in like October when I went to Rivian of last year. So I just moved to Rivian, moved to a new area and everything, and then for this job that didn't work out, and now I'm just like, you know, what am I doing here? But in my diagnostics at Rivian, I kind of got to befriend some people that were interested in learning more about that kind of stuff, and I think naturally the topic of physics comes up every now and then with maybe any sort of diagnostic technician that is the least bit nerdy. Because you start to realize when you're using a scope, this ever-present waveform that pops up in vibrations or mechanical concerns or electrical concerns. And you just start realizing the interconnectedness of everything on the car, the way everything behaves.
Mm-hmm.
There's this wave everywhere, and all of a sudden you're like, you start, and maybe not everyone does this, and this is maybe where I'm just a nerd, but you start thinking like, I wonder what this whole physics thing is all about. And so like you start looking into physics a little bit, and what a wave and all, and you
Yep.
talk
Yep.
about it, and then yeah, like Matt Fonzo said, quanta, and you look into the quantum physics, and you're like, what is this nonsense? And that was kind of one of the conversations, subject matter we have at Rivian. A few friends I had made there, talk about, like, I was like, what do you think about quantum physics? And he's like, what do you think about string theory? I kind of have my nerd friends. And to the point where I think even the people that were causing me trouble kind of jeered at me and said, if you like physics so much, why don't you go work at SpaceX or something? And I don't have a desire to work for either Tesla or SpaceX. I'm just gonna say that. But it was just kind of funny. I had left this job, and it was a really tough spot. I was like, I didn't want to quit, but I was like, I did not feel comfortable going back. And I'm just thinking, I'm like, you know, SpaceX. I don't know if I like SpaceX, but isn't there another rocket ship company? And I was like, oh yeah, Blue Origin. I was like, you know, it's one of those moments looking back. I was like, I only did it because I was like, they said I should, they kind of made fun of me and said I should go apply to SpaceX. Well, I'm gonna do this. I want to try Blue Origin. I want to see how. And so I'm like, but before I do this, I'm like, I'm looking at their website. I'm looking at the jobs, and I'm just like, what am I doing on this page? Like, I have no experience in aerospace. And it's funny because, like, even in my years at the dealership, like, I had looked at jobs on Indeed and I saw, like, airplane mechanic. It just never interested me. So, like, I
Yeah,
have
it's a
no
little
aerospace
different.
experience. And and I'm going to preface this, just to cover my bum, I'm not speaking on behalf of Blue Origin at all, and but I'm looking at this web page and I'm looking at some of the job applications, and there's some fancy titles of these names. I'm like, what is this? What? I have no idea what this stuff is, and I'm like reading through it. I'm like, well, sounds like something I maybe could learn. I'm gonna apply, but before that is like I scrolled to the bottom of the application, and they said there was a bit at the bottom that said, "Don't meet all the qualifications. Apply anyway. We're always looking to try and find unique talent, a fit here at Blue Order or whatever." I'm like, okay, well they asked for it now.
Uh-huh.
So I just went through and was like, this sounds interesting. Let me apply for this. And so I kind of just kind of this a barrage. I was like, what's gonna happen? What's the worst that's gonna happen? I'm not just gonna apply for. I'll apply for as many as I want, and then I'll either get them or I won't. And so I forget what I first applied for, and something silly, a bunch of things. I actually got chosen to get screened for some first application. I was like, oh, this is exciting. And I think it was like like refurbishing. It was like some kind of refurbishment technician where I would like refurbish the rocket after it landed or something. Some kind of role where you would do that. And
Okay.
not really a diag role, but I'm just kind of telling myself I just want to get into this industry. If I can get in it, I'm sure I can go somewhere. And so I applied for this like refurbishment technician role. And I went. It's a three-stage process. It was the most stringent process I ever went through, and I went through all three stages, and I didn't get the job. Um, I mean, I had to make like a PowerPoint and everything, and it was like, you know, yeah, I think you can catastrophize like you didn't get a job, like, oh, I'm so stupid, I'm never gonna get a job again. And then I got feedback on my first application. Um, Seems more interested in using his diagnostic skills than doing mechanical work. Think he'd be unhappy with job. And I was like, am
Okay.
I just shooting myself in the foot? You know? You know? It's like, what do I do here? And then my wife's like, well, just but I had several different feedbacks. Because I had to interview with a panel. And one of them said, think would be a good fit for like avionics or something, which is like testing, flight controls kind of. It, Point being is that like it kind of said like, well, that person sounded somewhat positive, and my wife was like, why don't you just keep trying? I'm like, okay. So long story short, um, I apply and I get some kind of email. We wanted to screen, and essentially and here's where I'm gonna be speaking generalities. Essentially, it was just a role. Um, you need to fix stuff and perform preventive maintenance on some things,
Okay.
and some pretty cool things, mind you. Um, and and I was like, yeah, I mean, this is like, it's like I'm getting screened for this. This is pretty cool, and it was really comforting because uh, the main interviewer had used to work at BMW, and so like the reason. Um, he in hindsight, it's funny, well, not in hindsight, I found out like, my resume was actually in a discard pile. And he said he was going through this discard pile and he's like, well, this guy, he says on his resume that he knows how to use an oscilloscope because I had put on there that I had made the Facebook page for picoscope diagnostic, which I'm not even going to get into on this episode if I'm ever on again, maybe. But
Okay.
I had made the Facebook page, and so like he saw like that on my resume. He's like, well, he obviously cares about like diagnostics, and why don't we give this kid a shot? And um, long story short, I'm working for Blue, um, and and here's where I want to say, I don't know what to really say with this because it's like I'm not going to go into my job too much. I just know like I got this job, and I don't feel like I deserve it at all. But I look at myself and I think when I was an ASEP, and this is what I messaged you about.
Uh-huh.
my instructor told me about, the skills you learn here in automotive, you can take anywhere. Okay, you're dealing with hydraulics, electricity, refrigeration. You deal with everything. You get this idea of like how all these different systems work, and it's what everything else. It's physics. That's what it is. Gases and electricity and mechanical things. It's just physics. We don't always call it that in automotive, but it's what it is. And so, basically, well, if you know how to work on a car, you should be able to apply that to this. And so he mentioned how one of his former students, she's like, he works at NASA. And I was still a student at the time, and I'm like, man, that's pretty crazy. I'll never do something like that. And then, and I guess what I want to say is that I don't think I'm necessarily more special than anybody else. I don't think I necessarily did anything better than anybody else. But like, I'm just like, how did I get to this point? And I think it's just being principled. Just it feels weird condensing 8 years of my life into like this point, and I don't want to think that. I think some people like to portray that success is this thing that everyone can achieve, and you can do what I do if you just do this. And I think we all have different circumstances. We can all. Hold on. Did I? Can you still hear me?
Yeah, I can still hear you.
Is there echo?
Yeah, but I can clean it up.
Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna turn it down.
Actually, you know what? I'll do. Oh, I can't change that during recording. No, don't worry about it. I'll fix it.
You're good. And I guess what I wanted to say is that I'm not just like some superhuman that did this because I'm just so smart or whatever. I think I started off at a point where I knew nothing. But if there's anything I want to send out or whatever, it's just that there's people at different points in their career that are probably at where I was at, when I was an apprentice, and wondering if like, why am I doing this? When you're constantly swimming upstream every day, you're surrounded by people that will lie to get stuff paid on warranty, make up stuff. I mean, the list goes on. You're constantly surrounded by this kind of just, essentially sacrifice your morality to make a living. And it's just like the pressure to conform to that can be very intense.
Yeah.
And I think if I'm not necessarily saying to wrap up the episode, but as I put a cap on like work, because that's where I'm at now in my career, completely away from automotive, wondering how I got here. But I think it's just, at the end of every day, we have a choice about who we're going to be, and if we're going to be an honest person. And I thought very carefully, and you can edit this out if you'd like. I thought when I started watching Scanner Danner, I started watching Paul Danner, and then I realized, he was a man of faith, and he applied, what he thought, his principled life based on what he had, read in the Bible.
Yeah.
And I'm not here to preach or anything, but and it's so funny because like I tell people this, and I'm like, what? So like I wanted Jehovah's Witnesses, okay, and so people are like, wait, you're normal people? I'm like, yes, we are, but from the Bible, it's like just be an honest person, and if you stick to those principles, I mean, you don't know how your circumstances might change if you commit yourself to being, a person of integrity. And, there may be times where you're hitting your head against the wall, like, what's the point of even being a decent person? And I think I'd be lying if I said at some time, like, even small, it's like, just push this through, or just, you know what I'm saying? But, if you commit yourself to, like, I'm not going to be like that. I'm not going to be like this tech, or I'm not going to do what managers to do just because they said so. At the end of the day, we're responsible for our choices. And if I could just say anything, it's just I think there's something to be gained from just sticking to your morals. So I don't know what else to say.
No, that's a great message. I don't know if you've listened to any of like Jordan Peterson's stuff. I've listened to some of his books and stuff like that, and one of the things he talks about is like speaking the truth whatever, whatever that is. And as far as you know it, right? It will lead you to the best version of your life, or the biggest adventure, that or a bigger adventure than you could imagine, just by speaking the truth. And it's going to be really hard at points, and you get a lot of pushback, and other people are not going to like it. But if you can do that, it is such a good thing for you in the long run. And I think that's kind of what you're speaking to there, with sticking the course and not accepting the things as they were, as this is the way we always do it, or this is the way it works, right? So that's cool, man. That's a great story.
Yeah, and it's like I don't want to, I realize I have a lot to learn, and I'll be very honest with you. The adjustment to this job, going back to that flat rate hustle, I thought coming into this job, I was like, I'm a hard worker. Um, you want to talk about like another level of pressure? It's a jump, but it's just like somehow I got here,
Yeah.
and I'm gonna try and make this work. You know, so and I hope that in some small way, I can be maybe this is the episode that maybe someone hears and like, that's pretty cool. Why can't I do that? And I'm not saying that that person may go work on rocket ships, but it might be something else.
Mhm.
I never planned on working on rocket ships, but like, I mean, and that's the good, you don't know where your life will take you. And, now, and when I think it's fun, it's really nice. I kind of just keep this to myself, for all the people that criticized me or jeered at me and said, well, Andre, it's not rocket science. Well, like now I can finally say it is. Yeah.
That's
So,
awesome. Uh, Dude, yeah, that is so cool. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I think probably is a good place to wrap it up, unless you want to touch on anything else. But I think that's pretty inspirational to somebody, especially somebody just starting out in the field.
yeah, I think I probably put a cap on it there. I actually got to. I work 6 to 2:30, so I got to get up at 4 in the morning. So I'm
Oh,
gonna go to
okay.
bed
All
here
right.
soon. But who knows? Maybe in the future I'll be on again at some point.
Yeah.
Doesn't have to be right
I'd
away.
like
We'll
to
know the time.
hear like how this looks as you go down the road, and what the,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Assuming
for
I don't get
sure.
fired, it's we'll see where I'm at 3 months down the road. So, but
Yeah,
yeah,
don't misdiagnose a rocket engine. That sounds really bad.
yeah, yeah. I don't want to do that. There's been some blunders, and I'm very thankful that they've been very patient with me. It's a great. I'll just say this: something that's not confidential is that it's a great company to work for. Um, I will say that, and that's just my personal impression. Great, best job I've ever had.
Okay.
And it's just interesting to see the way different industries are developing. And I guess if somebody's thinking about trying a different industry, you never know where it might go. So I don't know. Maybe I'll be on again. We'll see. But I think I want to definitely say thank you. It's been sounds a little mushy, but I think in some way, that decision to look up, like, is there an automotive podcast? I don't know how things would have been. Would I have been working on rocket ships? Who knows? So I want to thank you, Mr. Kyle Tipping.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad I could help out, even if it was in a small way. So,
Yeah.
thank you for sharing your story and listening. I appreciate it. So, cool, man.
Well, is it good night?
All right, that is going to do it for today's episode. Thank you to Andre for joining me on the show. Definitely appreciate it. Cool story. Also like to thank everybody else out there for listening to the show. Hey, if you got any ideas about the show, things you'd like to hear about, people you'd like to hear about, or if you want to be on the show, hit me up. My email is in the show notes, or you can shoot me a message on Facebook Messenger. If I don't get back to you right away, I'm not ignoring you. I'm just got a lot of stuff to do, but I do try to eventually get back to everybody. So once again, thank you for listening. And with that all out of the way, let's get out there and fix the world one car at a time.